A stone road is more than a path for travelers. It is a declaration. For ancient empires, the deliberate expansion of road networks was not a simple afterthought to conquest. It was the primary mechanism of transformation, a tool of geopolitical alchemy. This exploration is about the raw, transformative power of infrastructure. We will see how these engineered lines of stone and dirt turned distant, foreign provinces, lands of distinct cultures and peoples, into the beating economic hearts and politically loyal core regions of history's greatest empires. By the end, you will understand the precise, often ruthless, blueprint empires used to physically reshape the world and absorb it into their dominion. How could a simple strip of packed earth rewrite the entire story of a people and a place? What unseen forces traveled along these routes, beyond just soldiers and carts? The mystery lies in how something so basic could permanently alter the very geography of power and identity. What does it truly take to make a foreign land feel like home for an empire? To achieve this transformation, an imperial road was engineered with a specific, powerful intent. It was not merely a trail worn by local feet over generations. It was a constructed artery built to serve the empire's body. The first principle was durability. These were not dirt paths. They were layered constructions of packed gravel, stone slabs, and deep foundations designed to withstand the relentless passage of armies, official couriers, and heavy trade caravans for centuries. This physical permanence sent a silent, unmistakable message. The empire was not a temporary visitor. It was here to stay, and its mark upon the land was as solid as the road itself. Directness was the second commandment. Imperial roads prized straight lines over winding, traditional routes. They cut through hills with cuttings, crossed valleys with immense embankments, and pierced forests with cleared corridors. This geometric precision served a brutal logic of speed and control. The shortest distance between two imperial points was a line of authority. It meant troops could be deployed faster to quell unrest. It meant tax collectors and imperial decrees could travel with unprecedented efficiency. The landscape itself was being recalibrated to the empire's clock. Then came all-weather capability. A local trail might be impassable for seasons, isolating communities. An imperial road with its stone drainage culverts and raised beds aimed to be open year-round. This transformed time and distance. What was once a journey of weeks in the wet season could become a matter of days. This reliability was revolutionary. It turned unpredictable, seasonal travel into a scheduled, dependable flow of people and goods, binding the rhythm of the province to the steady pulse of the imperial capital. But the road was only the spine. The true system lived in the infrastructure built along it. At regular intervals, waystations provided fresh horses for the imperial courier service, the lifeblood of long-distance communication. Guard posts and small garrison forts offered security, projecting imperial power into the countryside and protecting the valuable traffic. Sturdy bridges spanned rivers that were once major barriers, literally bridging the gap between the empire and its new territory. Each bridge, each fort, each mile marker was a node of imperial presence. A traveler on this road was never truly outside the empire's grasp. They moved from one point of its control to the next, constantly reminded of whose law governed the land they traversed. So this road system was far more than a tool for getting from here to there. It was the physical manifestation of imperial logic stamped onto the earth. It standardized distance with milestones, it regulated travel with waystations, it secured passage with garrisons. In its very design, durable, direct, and relentless, it embodied the empire's core values of order, control, and permanence. It was the necessary precondition, the hardened channel, through which all the transformative forces of empire would soon flow. With this engineered pathway in place, the real work of reshaping a remote province could begin. What exactly traveled down these roads to enact such a profound change? The answer lies in a flow far more powerful than any army. The blueprint for this transformative power was first laid in stone over 2,000 years ago. To understand the Empire Road model, we must look to its most famous architect, Rome, and no road better exemplifies the strategy than the legendary Via Appia. Begun in 312 BC, the Appian Way was not born from a desire for trade or cultural exchange. It was conceived in the fire of war, a direct response to a military crisis in the mountainous region of Samnium, south of Rome. Its initial purpose was starkly simple: to move legions quickly and reliably into contested, often hostile territory. Before the first stone was set, Roman engineers envisioned a highway that would render the rugged landscape irrelevant, allowing soldiers and supplies to flow south like a torrent. This was infrastructure as a weapon, designed to project force with terrifying efficiency. But the genius of the Via Appia and the Roman model was what happened after the armies marched. The road did not just facilitate conquest, it cemented it. Once built, this durable, straight stone highway fundamentally altered the relationship between Rome and the lands it passed through. The hostile hills of Samnium and the fertile plains of Campania were suddenly, physically connected to the Roman Forum. Distance was no longer measured in miles but in days of march, a time now controlled by Rome. Local tribes who might have resisted found their independence eroded not just by the sword, but by the steady, irreversible presence of the road itself. It brought Roman law, Roman settlers, and Roman merchants directly into their midst. Towns that sprang up along its route did so according to Roman plans, with Roman forums and Roman temples. The road was the delivery system for an entire culture. In this way, the Via Appia accomplished the core imperial alchemy. It turned geographically distant and politically foreign territories into accessible, integrated provinces. Campania, with its rich farmlands, was no longer a separate region to be occasionally raided or negotiated with. It became Rome's breadbasket, its wealth now flowing north along the very road built to subdue it. The road created a new economic reality that made continued independence not just difficult but illogical. Why fight the empire when your prosperity is now tied to its network? Political control followed this physical and economic integration. By the time Rome formally declared full authority over these regions, the transformation was already complete. The people there were living in a Roman landscape, engaging in Roman commerce and governed by Roman logistics. Thus, the Via Appia served as the perfect prototype. It proved that a road could be the first and most lasting act of domination, a permanent claim staked into the earth. Rome learned that building a highway was a more profound act than winning a battle. A battle could be forgotten or avenged, but a well-built road rewired the land forever. The success of this model became the template for the entire empire. From the foggy hills of Britannia to the deserts of Syria, the vast network of Roman roads all followed the same foundational principle established by the Appian Way. First, build the road. Control, assimilation, and transformation will inevitably follow in its wake. This raises a compelling question, though. While the Romans perfected this model, were they truly its inventors, or did they learn from an even older master of geopolitical engineering, one whose roads were built not for chariots, but for the swiftest messengers on earth? Yet the Romans were not the first to grasp this profound truth. Centuries before a single stone of the Via Appia was laid, an empire of staggering scale had already mastered the art of control through connection. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, faced a challenge of almost unimaginable complexity. governing dozens of distinct cultures, languages, and ancient kingdoms without fracturing. Their ingenious solution was not a network of stone highways for legions, but a system of royal roads designed for the speed of information. The Persian Royal Road was the internet of the ancient world, a web of well-maintained routes with one paramount purpose: to bind a diverse realm through the sheer velocity of command and communication. At its heart was the famous royal messenger service. Herodotus, the Greek historian, immortalized their efficiency with a phrase that captured the empire's logistical brilliance. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. These riders did not carry trade goods or settlers. They carried the will of the King of Kings himself, edicts, intelligence reports, and administrative orders. By changing horses at meticulously spaced relay stations, a messenger could travel the nearly 1,700 miles from the imperial capital at Susa to the Aegean coast in just 7 days, a journey that would take an ordinary traveler 3 months. This created a radical new reality. A governor in distant Egypt or Anatolia could no longer plead that a royal command arrived too late to be obeyed. The empire's reach was now as fast as a galloping horse, making rebellion logistically perilous and loyal administration effortlessly efficient. This constant, rapid flow of information transformed the relationship between the imperial center and its provinces, known as satrapies. Where Rome sought to assimilate and Romanize, Persia aimed to oversee and integrate. The royal road allowed for a sophisticated, centralized bureaucracy to function across continents. Tax revenues could be assessed and transported. Royal inspectors could travel unexpectedly to ensure satraps remained faithful. The road became a literal line of accountability, tethering each distant governor directly to the throne. It projected the royal presence not through colonies of settlers, but through the relentless, predictable arrival of the king's word. This system respected local customs and rulers to a far greater degree than the Roman model, yet it wove them all into a single, manageable administrative tapestry. The road did not demand that a Babylonian become a Persian. It simply required that he obey Persian law and pay Persian taxes, with the understanding that disobedience would be met with a swift, coordinated response. The Royal Road was therefore the ultimate tool of geopolitical management. It enabled the Persians to achieve something remarkable: maintaining cohesion across immense ethnic and cultural diversity through the soft power of logistics and communication. It proved that control could be exerted not only by changing a land's culture, but by mastering the time it took to govern it. This Persian legacy of administrative roads would influence empires for millennia. But it presents us with a fascinating duality in the history of imperial infrastructure. One empire built roads to move its culture outward, while the other built roads to pull information inward. Both strategies were devastatingly effective, yet they set the stage for the next and perhaps most subtle phase of transformation. Once the roads for soldiers and messengers were built, who else arrived to walk them? And what did they carry in their packs that would quietly, irrevocably change everything? While Persia mastered the flow of information, another empire on the opposite side of the world pursued unity through uncompromising uniformity. In ancient China, following centuries of bloody conflict between rival states, the Qin dynasty achieved a sudden, brutal unification. The first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, faced a monumental task: how to bind together a vast, newly conquered realm of distinct cultures, laws, and even measurements. His answer was not just roads, but a radical standardization of the very world those roads traveled through. The Qin did not merely build infrastructure, they rebuilt reality to fit their administrative template, and the straight roads were their ruler. The most famous of these, the Zhai Dao, or Straight Road, was a 900-li engineering marvel stretching north from the capital toward the nomadic frontiers. Its name was its philosophy: It disregarded the gentle curves of the landscape, cutting through mountains and spanning valleys with immense raised embankments. This relentless directness was a physical manifestation of the emperor's will, a line of imperial authority drawn across the map. But the true genius of the Qin system lay in a seemingly small, yet profoundly transformative detail: the standardization of the axle width for all carts and chariots. The emperor decreed a single, universal gauge. This single technical specification had cascading, revolutionary effects. Every major road built across the empire, including the straight roads, was now constructed with ruts carved into the stone at this exact width. A cart from the former state of Kai could now travel smoothly on roads in the former state of Chu, its wheels perfectly aligned with the grooves worn by thousands of other identical vehicles. This created the world's first integrated, empire-wide transportation network. The economic implications were immediate and profound. Trade was no longer a difficult, localized affair. Goods, taxes, and resources could flow from the farthest rice paddies in the south to the granaries of the capital with unprecedented ease and efficiency, because every cart fit every road. This physically enforced a single, unified market where before there had been many separate ones. More subtly, this standardization became a powerful tool for cultural and legal homogenization. The roads did not just carry goods, they carried imperial clerks, legal codes written on standardized bamboo slips, and regiments of soldiers whose chariots all moved at the same pace. A citizen in any province now interacted with the same imperial measurements, the same written characters, and the same bureaucratic procedures. The fractured identities of the warring states period were steadily worn down by the relentless, repetitive traffic moving along these uniform channels. The landscape itself was reprogrammed. Where a mountain pass or a river might have once defined a cultural boundary, the straight road now defined a route of imperial access. Frontier regions, once wild and separate, were physically stitched to the heartland. The Han dynasty that followed inherited and expanded this network, understanding that these roads were the circulatory system of a unified state. They allowed for the rapid deployment of troops to secure borders, the efficient collection of taxes to fund the government, and the spread of Confucian ideology that would become the glue of Chinese civilization for 2 millennia. The Qin and Han roads achieved something extraordinary. They turned a geographic and cultural mosaic into a cohesive political entity by making the experience of distance and movement identical for everyone, everywhere under heaven's mandate. The empire was no longer an abstract idea. It was the solid, grooved path beneath your cartwheels, leading unmistakably back to the emperor's gate. This drive for unity through roads raises a parallel yet darker question. What happens when an empire's road network is built not for trade or administration, but for a single, grim purpose? Can infrastructure designed for extraction and control also, paradoxically, become a lifeline that preserves a civilization against all odds? The principle of roads as imperial bindings was not confined to the continents of Europe or Asia. High in the Andes Mountains, the Inca Empire engineered a system that defied every conventional limitation, proving the universality of this geopolitical truth. In a realm of soaring peaks, deep ravines, and seismic instability, they built the Qhapaq Ñan, a vast network of roads spanning over 25,000 miles. This was an empire of vertical geography, where a journey of a few miles could take you from tropical lowlands up to frozen highland plains. The Inca solution was to build not one road, but a web of interconnected trails, staircases carved into cliff faces, and daring suspension bridges woven from mountain grass, stitching together these radically different ecological zones into a single, manageable domain. Their genius lay in adapting the core imperial road model to a world without two of its most common components, the wheel and the horse. Instead of carts or chariots, the lifeblood of this system was human movement. An army of relay runners known as chasqis operated a messenger service that could rival the Persians. Stationed in small huts spaced a few miles apart, a runner would sprint with a verbal message or a knotted cord record called a quipu, pass it to the next fresh runner, and continue the chain. In this way, information could travel up to 150 miles in a single day, from the far reaches of modern-day Ecuador all the way to the capital of Cusco, high in the Peruvian mountains. Fresh seafood from the coast could be delivered to the emperor's table in the highlands through this same relentless human relay. The road physically manifested the empire's ability to compress time and distance, making the impossible seem routine. The Qhapaq Ñan bound the empire together through a powerful combination of ritual obligation and economic reciprocity. The road was not just an administrative tool, it was a sacred landscape. It led pilgrims to major ceremonial sites like the mountaintop sanctuary of Machu Picchu, weaving spiritual devotion into the very act of travel. More practically, it enabled the Mita system, a form of labor tax. Communities across the empire were required to contribute workers for state projects maintaining these very roads, building terraces, or serving in the army. To travel the road was often to fulfill a duty to the state. In return, the empire used the road network for redistribution. State storehouses positioned along the routes held surplus food, clothing, and tools. In times of local hardship, like a crop failure in one valley, goods could be mobilized from another zone and distributed, preventing famine and fostering loyalty. This created a powerful cycle. The provinces supplied labor and resources that flowed to the center along the roads, and the center, the Inca in Cusco, demonstrated his benevolence by sending security and sustenance back along those same channels. Thus, the Inca achieved the same ultimate result as Rome, Persia, and Qin China, using a completely different technological palette. The Qhapaq Ñan integrated a mosaic of distinct ethnic groups and extreme environments into a cohesive whole by making Cusco the unavoidable focal point of every journey, whether for ritual, work, or trade. The road was the empire's spine, and every subject, through their movement upon it, became part of its living body. This raises a final, pivotal consideration. We have seen how roads can build empires, but can they also preserve them? What happens when the flow along these imperial arteries is suddenly, catastrophically, cut off? The road's most immediate and brutal purpose was always conquest. Before it could carry merchants or messengers, it had to carry soldiers. An empire's frontier was a line drawn in the sand, constantly tested by rival powers and internal rebellion. To hold that line, to push it outward, required a mechanism to project force faster than any adversary could organize. The engineered road was that mechanism, a spearhead made of stone and logistics. It transformed the chaotic, slow movement of an army into a predictable, rapid deployment of power. Consider the Roman experience in Gaul. Before Julius Caesar's campaigns, Gaul was a vast, forested land of disparate tribes, difficult to traverse and impossible to control from a distance. A Roman legion marching on old tracks could be slowed to a crawl by mud, ambushed in narrow passes, or simply get lost. Caesar's genius, like that of empire builders before him, was not just in winning battles but in building roads as he advanced. His engineers would follow the legions, clearing wide paths, building sturdy bridges over rivers like the Rhine, and establishing fortified camps that evolved into permanent towns. These roads did two things with devastating efficiency. First, they allowed reinforcements and supplies to reach the front lines with a reliability the Gauls could not match. A tribe that revolted in one valley would find not a single, exhausted legion arriving weeks later, but fresh troops arriving in a matter of days, fed by supply trains moving along the same secure route. Second, and perhaps more importantly, these roads segmented the territory. A network of Roman roads cut through the forests that once provided cover and unity for the Gallic tribes. It divided the land into manageable corridors, making coordinated, large-scale rebellion logistically impossible. The road did not just move Roman soldiers in, it boxed the native population into a new Roman geography of control. This same principle operated on the other side of the world. The Han dynasty's expansion into the Tarim Basin, a crucial corridor of the Silk Road, was a campaign fought as much by shovel as by sword. The arid, sprawling deserts were a natural barrier against empire. An army could vanish there, defeated by distance and thirst before ever seeing an enemy. The Han response was to build and guard a chain of roads and oasis forts. They established the famous Silk Road northern route, but it was far from a peaceful trade path. It was a militarized supply line. Han engineers built raised embankments to keep the road clear of shifting sands and stationed troops at fortified waystations with secure water sources. This allowed Han expeditionary forces to project power deep into the basin, protecting allied city-states and punishing those who resisted. The road turned an impassable wasteland into a navigable, secured imperial avenue. What was once a contested, mysterious frontier became, through the relentless maintenance of this infrastructure, a Chinese sphere of influence. The road guaranteed that a message from a Han garrison in the distant basin could reach the capital, and that the emperor's retribution could follow that same path back with terrifying speed. The mechanism is clear. A road reduces the friction of distance, a term strategists use to describe how terrain slows down military power. Mud, mountains, and rivers give the defender a huge advantage. An imperial road system systematically removes that advantage. It standardizes the landscape to favor the empire's way of war. A revolt that might have taken months to quell when news traveled by foot and armies marched on trails could now be crushed in weeks. The constant threat of rapid response acted as a powerful deterrent, making rebellion seem futile before it even began. In this way, roads did not just secure territory, they actively expanded the empire's secure zone. Each new mile of road pushed the frontier of permanent control a little further, turning yesterday's bloody battlefield into tomorrow's peaceful, taxable province. The frontier fort of one generation became the bustling market town of the next, all because the road behind it ensured it would never be cut off or abandoned. But once the soldiers had secured the land, a quieter yet equally powerful force began to flow down those same stone channels. What happens when the spearhead is withdrawn and the road is open to everyone else? But a road built for soldiers soon becomes a highway for merchants. Once the initial shock of conquest faded and the frontier was secured, a far more profound and permanent transformation began. The very roads designed to move legions and quell rebellions now opened a channel for the empire's most potent tool of integration: economic re-engineering. The goal was to systematically dismantle local, self-sufficient subsistence economies and rewire them into tributary systems that served the imperial core. This was not random trade, it was a calculated redirection of wealth, turning provincial resources into imperial power. The most fundamental flow was of bulk staples, especially grain. In Rome, the fertile plains of Egypt and North Africa, once the breadbaskets of local kingdoms, were now connected to the capital by the Mediterranean sea lanes and, crucially, by the roads leading to the ports. Vast quantities of Egyptian wheat did not feed Egyptian cities. It was loaded onto ships bound for Ostia, the port of Rome, to feed the empire's massive urban population and its standing armies. The province's entire agricultural output was recalibrated to serve a distant metropolis. The road and port network made this extraction not only possible, but efficient, turning sustenance into tribute. Similarly, precious metals flowed in one direction toward the center. The silver mines of Spain, the gold of Dacia, were connected to the imperial mints by secure overland routes. The wealth of the earth, once dormant or used for local ornament, was now systematically dug up, processed, and transported along imperial highways to be stamped into coins that paid for more soldiers, more roads, and more monuments in the capital. The province was physically depleted to enrich the empire's treasury, its very geology becoming a source of imperial currency. This system also created new, state-controlled economic landscapes along the routes themselves. Major road junctions and river crossings, once simple villages, blossomed into planned market towns. Here, the empire did not just allow trade, it managed it. Official warehouses stored grain for the annona, the state grain dole. Imperial officials monitored weights, measures, and the collection of portoria, the trade taxes that were a major source of revenue. These towns were not organic centers of local commerce. They were nodes in a state-supervised network designed to facilitate the smooth flow of tribute and tax. A local farmer might bring his surplus to such a market, but he would sell it under imperial rules to merchants licensed by the state, who would then transport it on imperial roads. His prosperity became entangled with the system. The most telling effect was the creation of specialized, dependent economies. A province was often encouraged or forced to focus on what it could best provide for the empire. One region might become a vast sheep run for wool to clothe the armies, another a center for olive oil production, another for pottery. This monoculture made the province economically valuable to the core, but also vulnerable. It lost its ability to be self-sufficient. If the demand for its single export faltered, or if the road was cut by conflict, local hardship could follow. This dependency was the final, subtle lock in the imperial economic model. The province's prosperity now relied on its connection to the imperial market, which relied on the imperial peace, which was guaranteed by the imperial roads. To rebel was not just a political act, it was an economic suicide, severing the very lifeline that sustained the local elite and the population they governed. In this way, the stone highway became a financial conduit. It transformed land from a home into a resource, and people from citizens of their own place into producers for a distant system. The province was no longer a conquered territory. It was an integrated, vital organ in the imperial body. Its economic heartbeat measured in the steady rhythm of carts moving tribute toward the heart. Yet, as wealth and goods flowed toward the center, something else began to travel back down those same roads, something less tangible than grain or gold, but far more enduring. What happens when an empire exports not just demands, but its entire way of life? The flow of goods was soon followed by a flow of people. An empire could not truly claim a land until its own citizens walked upon it, not as temporary soldiers or administrators, but as permanent settlers. This deliberate demographic shift, the third mechanism of transformation, used the road as a literal pathway to a new social order. The goal was to physically and permanently alter the human landscape of a province, seeding it with loyal communities whose very presence would dilute local identity and cement imperial control. The most powerful tool for this was state-sponsored colonization. Rome mastered this art with the establishment of coloniae, planned towns for retired legionary veterans. After 25 years of service, a soldier was granted a plot of land, not in familiar Italy, but often in a recently pacified and strategically vital province. A network of roads connected these new towns to each other and back to the regional capital. Imagine a retired centurion from Gaul, given a farm on land that once belonged to a rebellious chieftain in North Africa. He arrives via the very road his legion helped build. He builds his home according to Roman design, worships at a temple to Roman gods, and governs his new community under Roman law. This veteran was not just a farmer, he was a living garrison. His prosperity was tied entirely to the empire that granted him this new life, making him a fiercely loyal bulwark against any local unrest. His presence, and that of hundreds of other veteran families, created a patchwork of culturally Roman islands in what was once foreign territory. Alongside these formal colonies came a quieter, steady stream of voluntary migration. The new roads made distant provinces suddenly accessible and attractive. Ambitious merchants from the heartland, seeing opportunity, traveled these safe routes to set up shop in provincial market towns, bringing with them not only goods but also their language, customs, and business practices. Farmers from overcrowded or less fertile imperial core regions heard of vast, newly available lands along these frontiers and packed their families into carts to start anew. This organic migration was perhaps even more transformative than the official colonies because it was self-perpetuating. These settlers built lives, raised families, and formed communities that were culturally imperial by default, creating a pervasive new normal in the province. The cumulative effect of this influx was a profound dilution of the local population and culture. A region that was once homogeneously Celtic or Illyrian or Numidian now found itself with a growing Latin-speaking minority who controlled prime farmland, dominated commerce in the towns, and held local political offices. Intermarriage between settlers and locals further blurred the old lines, creating a new, hybrid generation for whom the empire was not an outside force, but the reality they were born into. The local elite often found it advantageous to adopt imperial styles, language, and manners to maintain their status, accelerating the cultural shift. Within a generation or two, the demographic and cultural map of the province was irrevocably redrawn. The road had not just moved armies and wheat, it had moved human beings on a mass scale, carrying the empire's culture in their wagons and in their minds. The distant province no longer just served the imperial heartland, it began to physically and culturally resemble it. This quiet, relentless resettlement was the final, human layer in the imperial blueprint. But it prompts a deeper, more personal question. What did it feel like to be on the receiving end of this grand design? For the individual living in a province, how did this network of roads reshape the very experience of daily life, identity, and time itself? Yet the most profound cargo carried on these roads was not grain or gold, but ideas. The fourth and final mechanism of transformation was cultural and ideological integration, a silent conquest of the mind facilitated by the relentless traffic moving from the imperial core to the provinces. Roads became the central nervous system for the empire's soft power, transmitting language, law, currency, and belief systems with the same efficiency as military orders. This was how a foreign administration evolved into a shared civilization. Language was the first and most vital wave. Along the Roman roads, Latin did not arrive as a gentle suggestion. It was the official tongue of the legions garrisoned at forts, the tax collectors in the market towns, and the magistrates in the newly built basilicas. For any local merchant, artisan, or aspiring local chieftain, learning Latin was not merely academic. It was the key to opportunity, to legal standing, and to social advancement. The milestones themselves, inscribed with Latin text, were constant stone reminders of this new linguistic reality. Over generations, vulgar Latin, the spoken version used by soldiers and settlers, blended with local dialects to form the Romance languages, a living legacy of that imperial linguistic tide. The road did not just carry Latin speakers, it created the conditions where their language took root and grew. Parallel to language came the rule of law. Imperial roads were the delivery routes for a standardized legal framework. Roman law, codified and consistent, traveled on papyrus scrolls in the saddlebags of imperial officials. It replaced a patchwork of local tribal customs with a universal system. For the first time, a traveler from one end of the province to the other could expect the same rules regarding property, contracts, and personal status. This created a powerful sense of order and predictability that benefited commerce and social stability. More subtly, it reoriented loyalty. Justice was no longer sought from a local patriarch or tribal council, but from a Roman magistrate whose authority flowed directly from the emperor and whose judgments were enforced by soldiers who arrived via the very road the plaintiff traveled. The law became a tangible expression of the empire's promise of peace and fairness, making allegiance to a distant emperor a practical, daily reality. This ideological package was cemented by two other powerful tools: coinage and state religion. Imperial coins minted from provincial metals were more than money. They were miniature billboards as they passed from hand to hand in every market and tavern along the road network. They disseminated the emperor's image and his official titles. A farmer paying his taxes with a silver denarius held a portrait of the emperor in his palm, a constant, intimate reminder of the source of authority. Similarly, the roads led pilgrims and officials to centers of the imperial cult, where the ruling emperor was honored as a divine or semi-divine figure. Participation in these ceremonies became a public demonstration of loyalty, a ritual that bound diverse communities together in a common, state-sanctioned practice. The same process unfolded along the post roads of Han China. The imperial bureaucracy required a unified written language, and the use of a standardized form of Mandarin in all official documents was enforced. Couriers carried these documents across the realm, making this script the language of power and administration. Confucian principles of hierarchy, filial piety, and meritocratic service traveled with these bureaucrats, becoming the ethical foundation for local governance. A young man from a remote province could now, by mastering the classics and the imperial examinations, travel the very roads built by the state to take up a post in the capital itself. The road network physically enabled the circulation of the elite, turning a unifying ideology into a career path. This was the ultimate, self-perpetuating triumph of the imperial road. It did not just move armies to conquer land or goods to enrich a capital. It moved the very concepts of identity and belonging. A person in a province could now think in the empire's language, seek justice under its laws, transact with its currency, and worship within its sanctioned framework. The foreign was gradually made familiar, the imposed was slowly made personal. The road, once a symbol of conquest, had become the pathway to a common future. But this leads us to a final, haunting reflection on the nature of power and its footprints. What happens when the empire that built these magnificent roads finally falls? When the legions are gone and the emperor's face on the coins is no longer recognized, what is left of this grand design in the silent stones? The emperor's will, however powerful, was useless if it could not reach the people. The grand strategies of conquest and economic extraction relied on a far more mundane reality: the daily, grinding work of administration. A royal decree was merely ink on parchment until a system existed to carry it to a provincial governor, and more importantly, to ensure that governor obeyed it. This is where the imperial road revealed its true purpose as the central nervous system of the state, a physical network that made bureaucracy possible. The road became the essential conduit through which the empire's paperwork, its watchful eyes, and its demanding hands reached into every corner of its domain. To understand this, we must follow the journey of an imperial inspector. His mission is to audit the grain stores in a distant province, a week's travel from the capital. He does not embark on a risky, solitary adventure. He travels the imperial post road, a system within the system. At precise intervals along the route, perhaps every 10 or 15 miles, he finds a state-maintained posting station. These were not inns for the public, but official waypoints stocked with fresh horses, fodder, and basic lodgings for those on state business. By presenting his official warrant, the inspector could exchange his tired mount for a fresh one and continue his journey with minimal delay. This network of stations turned a long, arduous trek into a series of manageable sprints, compressing time and distance in the service of the state. It meant an inspector, a tax collector, or a courier carrying urgent military intelligence could move with a speed and reliability that no local official or potential rebel could hope to match. The road did not just connect places, it scheduled and regulated the movement of imperial power itself. Who traveled these privileged routes? The most frequent and often most feared visitor was the tax collector. Before the road, collecting tribute from remote villages was a slow, uncertain, and often dangerous affair. Local chieftains could delay, underreport, or simply plead the difficulty of the journey. The Imperial Road changed that calculus entirely. Now the tax collector arrived on a predictable schedule, his authority underscored by the very highway that brought him. He traveled with standardized measures and ledgers, and behind him lay a clear, secure path back to the provincial capital where his reports and the collected silver, grain, or textiles would be sent. The road made taxation systematic, efficient, and inescapable. It transformed tribute from a negotiated gift into a routine administrative procedure. Equally important was the census official. An empire cannot govern what it does not count. To levy fair taxes, to conscript soldiers, to understand the resources of a land, the state needed to know its people. Census officials would travel from town to village, using the roads to reach even isolated hamlets. They recorded names, land holdings, family members, and livestock. This information, compiled and sent back along the same road network, allowed the central government to create detailed maps of human and economic geography. For the first time, the emperor could have a reasonably accurate idea of the population and wealth of a province he might never see. This data was the foundation of all state planning, and it was gathered on foot and horseback, mile by mile, along the imperial roads. Finally, there were the imperial inspectors, the eyes and ears of the distant throne. Their role was to prevent the provincial governor from becoming a little king in his own right. An inspector could arrive unannounced, thanks to the speed of the post system, and audit financial records, review troop deployments, and hear petitions from local citizens. His very presence was a deterrent against corruption or disloyalty, because his report would travel swiftly back to the capital. The road ensured that no governor was ever truly beyond the reach of the central authority. It created a tangible line of accountability that stretched from the imperial palace to the farthest frontier fort. Without this physical network, the empire was just a collection of disconnected territories held together by occasional shows of force. With the road, the emperors will gain concrete, daily expression. A law passed in the capital could be proclaimed in a provincial forum within weeks. Taxes assessed in a remote valley could be delivered to the treasury. A corrupt official could be investigated and removed. The road made the state present, persistent, and pervasive. It turned abstract sovereignty into a practical, enforceable reality in the life of every farmer, merchant, and village elder. The distant rumble of cart wheels on stone was not just the sound of commerce, it was the heartbeat of imperial administration, a constant reminder that the center was watching, counting, and collecting. The story of this imperial blueprint is written most clearly not on maps, but in the soil of a single, transformed place. The mist-shrouded island of Britannia was the ultimate test case. Before the first Roman galley sighted its white cliffs, this was a land of deep forests and trackless bogs, home to dozens of fiercely independent Celtic tribes like the Catuvellauni and the Iceni. Their world was one of hilltop forts, local loyalties, and a patchwork of winding, muddy paths. To the Mediterranean-centered Roman mind, it was the very definition of a remote, barbaric frontier, a place at the ragged edge of the known world. The Claudian invasion of 43 AD was not merely a military campaign. It was the beginning of a profound geographical and social surgery. The legions did not just fight battles, they built roads, and with each mile of laid stone, they redrew the island's destiny. The most famous of these arteries was Watling Street. Beginning at the port of Richborough in Kent, This engineered highway cut northwest like a surveyor's line, straight through the heart of tribal territories. It was built for one urgent purpose: to speed the legions toward their next objective, the conquest of the Welsh mountains and the rebellious tribes of the north. Watling Street did not follow the old, respectful paths around sacred groves or along river valleys. It imposed a new logic of direct imperial access upon the landscape. Where it crossed the River Thames, the Romans built the first London Bridge, founding the settlement of Londinium at this strategic choke point. Almost overnight, a location that was once a scattering of huts became the nexus of the entire provincial road network, a hub designed by and for Roman traffic. This pattern repeated across the island. The Fosseway marked the first secure frontier line. Ermine Street thrust north toward York, and Darragh Street pushed relentlessly into the Scottish lowlands. Each road served as a line of conquest, but then, seamlessly, as a line of control and integration. The legions built forts, and around those forts, settlements grew to supply them. Tribal capitals, like that of the Atrebates at Silchester, were gradually replaced or overshadowed by new, Roman-planned towns laid out in the familiar grid pattern, complete with forums, basilicas, and public baths. These towns were not organic, they were implants of Roman urban life, strategically placed at road junctions and river crossings. The roads connected them into a single, manageable system. A provincial governor in London could now send orders or a cohort of soldiers to the regional capital at Cirencester or the legionary fortress at York with a speed and certainty that the old tribal kings could never have imagined. The local economy was utterly rewired. The roads enabled the systematic extraction of British resources: tin from Cornwall, lead from the Mendips, and vast quantities of grain to feed the army and export to the continent. In return, the island was flooded with Roman goods: fine Samian ware pottery from Gaul, Spanish olive oil, and Italian wine. A tribal elite that once displayed power with local torques and chariots now sought status by building Roman-style villas in the countryside, often positioned conveniently along these new roads. These villas were not just homes, they were agricultural factories producing surplus for the Roman market, their wealth literally rooted in the land but flowing along Roman channels. Within a few generations, the transformation was staggering. A young person born in Roman Britain 100 years after the invasion would inhabit a completely different world than their ancestors. They might live in a town with paved streets, a water supply, and public latrines. They would use coinage for trade, seek justice from a Roman magistrate, and perhaps even serve in the Roman army themselves. The old tribal identities did not vanish, but they were increasingly layered over with a Roman provincial identity. Britannia was no longer a collection of remote foreign territories. It had become an integrated province, its people, its economy, and its very landscape reorganized to function as a component of a vast Mediterranean empire. The roads made it possible, and then they made it permanent. But this grand integration raises a final, inevitable question. What happens when the engineers are gone and the empire that built this network ceases to command it? West of the fertile plains of the Chinese heartland, the land turns harsh and unforgiving. This was the Hexi Corridor, a 1,000-kilometer-long strip of arid land squeezed between the Tibetan Plateau and the Gobi Desert. For centuries, it was a windswept frontier, a realm of nomadic horsemen like the Xiongnu Confederation, who moved with the seasons and answered to no emperor. To the settled, agricultural civilization of China, this corridor was a dangerous and distant barrier, a place where imperial power faded into the shifting sands. Yet, for the Han dynasty, this barren passage held the key to the wider world and to their own security. Controlling it became an obsession, and their tool for transformation was a familiar one: infrastructure on an epic scale. The Han did not just send armies into the Hexi Corridor, they sent engineers, farmers, and bureaucrats, armed with a plan to permanently rewrite its geography. They constructed not only roads but an integrated system of fortification and settlement known as the walls and stations. The Great Wall extensions snaked along the corridor's northern edge, a formidable barrier against nomadic incursions. But a wall is a static defense. The true genius was in what they built behind it. A parallel military road was constructed, linking a chain of heavily garrisoned forts and fortified waystations. These were not temporary camps, they were self-sufficient agricultural colonies. Soldiers stationed there were also farmers, taming the marginal land with advanced irrigation techniques brought from the heartland. They dug canals from the corridor's few glacier-fed rivers, turning patches of desert into green, productive oases. This was a stroke of geopolitical brilliance. By making these garrisons agriculturally self-sustaining, the Han eliminated the crippling logistical problem of supplying distant forts across hundreds of miles of desert. The road network allowed these oasis forts to support each other, move troops rapidly to any threatened point, and most importantly, secure the vital trade path that now began to flow. That trade path was the Silk Road. The Hexi Corridor was its only safe passage through the mountains and deserts. With the road and wall system in place, what was once a treacherous no-man's land became the world's most heavily guarded and maintained commercial highway. Caravans from Central Asia, laden with jade, glass, and horses, could now travel from Dunhuang to the Chinese interior in relative safety, their passage monitored and taxed at each fortified gate. The corridor was no longer a barrier, it was a controlled funnel, and the Han held the neck. This security bred profound cultural change. As trade flourished, merchants, monks, and migrants from across Asia settled in the corridor's growing town. Chinese administrators, soldiers, and their families put down permanent roots. They built temples, schools, and marketplaces modeled on those in Chang'an. The local nomadic way of life was gradually, irrevocably displaced by settled agriculture and urban commerce. The land itself was sinicized, its very ecology altered by Chinese irrigation and farming practices. By the time of the Tang dynasty centuries later, the transformation was complete. The Hexi Corridor was no longer a frontier. It was a core province, a bustling, multicultural extension of the Imperial heartland itself. The Tang capital's fascination with Central Asian music, fashion, and religion flowed directly through this secure corridor. The road had done its work perfectly. It had turned a wild, external space into an internal, integral organ of the empire, proving that even the most hostile geography could be remade into a loyal heartland through the deliberate, sustained application of infrastructure and will. But a road is inert without the people who travel it. For the Inca, the Qhapaq Ñan was not merely a path for goods or messages. It was a channel for human energy, the physical medium for their most innovative and binding social institution, the Mita. This was not a tax paid in grain or silver, but in time and labor, a rotational service owed by every household to the state. The brilliance of the system lay in its motion. The road network allowed the Sopa Inka, the emperor, to mobilize tens of thousands of subjects from their home communities and temporarily relocate them to wherever their labor was needed most across the vast vertical empire. Imagine a farmer from a coastal valley, his life defined by fishing and warm weather. When his community's turn in the cycle arrived, he would join a work party traveling the high mountain roads to Cusco. For months, he would live and work alongside farmers from the high plains, weavers from the forest edge, and miners from the southern deserts. Together, they might terrace a mountainside to prevent erosion, maintain a crucial suspension bridge, or help construct a new temple complex. This was labor in motion, a temporary but massive redistribution of human effort orchestrated by the state. The Mita created a profound and deliberate dependency. An individual's community back home was not responsible for feeding him during his service. That duty fell to the state. Vast storehouses or kolkas positioned along the road network held surplus food and supplies precisely for this purpose. The worker was fed, clothed, and housed by the empire itself. This transformed the relationship between subject and sovereign. Your labor strengthened the state, and in return, the state demonstrated its benevolent power by caring for you directly, far from home. It made the abstract concept of the empire tangible and personal. More subtly, this constant circulation was a powerful engine of cultural integration. A worker from the north spent months in Cusco, absorbing the rituals, architecture, and sheer scale of the imperial capital. He saw the Sopa Inca in ceremony, witnessed the centralized planning, and worked alongside people from regions he had only heard of in stories. When his service ended and he returned home along the Great Road, he did not just bring back pay in the form of fine cloth or coca leaves. He carried back stories, a new understanding of his place in a vast system, and a direct personal connection to the divine emperor. This cycle of departure and return turned every province into a place that both sent its people out and welcomed them back as changed individuals. It wove a shared experience across ethnic and ecological boundaries. A farmer from the coast and a herder from the Altiplano might not speak the same primary language, but they could share the memory of straining together to haul a stone for a sun temple, or of receiving their ration of chicha from the same state warehouse. The Mita used the road to create a common imperial citizenship forged not by birth but by shared service. In this way, the Inca solved the eternal imperial puzzle of loyalty. They did not just extract resources from the provinces, they extracted labor and, in the process, reshaped identity. The road was the indispensable mechanism, the track along which this human capital flowed. It ensured that the empire was not a distant power taking things away, but a visible, providing entity that your own hands helped build. The dependency was mutual, and the connection, mile after hard mile, was literally walked into being. Yet this very network of control contained the seeds of its own subversion. A road built to move imperial power could, in the hands of a determined people, become a highway for rebellion. The same straight, durable paths that allowed legions to crush dissent also allowed that dissent to organize, communicate, and strike with a speed that mirrored the empire's own. The infrastructure of integration, when turned against its creators, revealed a profound vulnerability. In Roman Britain, this paradox erupted in fire and blood. The Iceni tribe, under their queen Boudica, had initially been a client kingdom, their elites co-opted by the Roman system. But when local Roman officials overstepped, seizing lands and committing grave injustices against the royal family, the fuse was lit. The rebellion did not simmer in isolation. The Roman road network, particularly Ermine Street and Watling Street, became Boudica's strategic asset. Her forces, which swelled with other disaffected tribes, could move rapidly along these paved highways. They coordinated their attacks on key Roman settlements Camuloginum, Londinium, Verulamium, towns that existed only because of the roads and which were now perfectly connected for a devastating, rolling campaign. The Romans had built the channels for their own commerce and administration, and Boudica's warriors used them as invasion routes. The roads that were meant to segment and control territory now unified the rebels, allowing them to concentrate their strength and achieve shocking early successes before the scattered Roman legions could reunite. A similar dynamic played out along the imperial post roads of China. During periods of dynastic weakness or harsh taxation, peasant uprisings could spread with terrifying speed. A local grievance in one province, carried by messengers riding the very same system built for imperial couriers, could ignite sympathetic revolts in neighboring regions. The roads meant to facilitate census-taking and tax collection now carried news of unrest, enabling rebel leaders to coordinate across vast distances. A famous example is the rebellion led by Huang Kao in the late Tang dynasty. His mobile army, composed of desperate farmers and soldiers, used the empire's own transportation network to march across the heartland, capturing key cities and even the capital itself for a time. The roads designed to bind the empire together became the arteries through which the lifeblood of rebellion flowed. Beyond facilitating movement, the roads themselves became symbolic and tactical targets. For dissident groups living under imperial rule, damaging a bridge, ambushing a convoy at a narrow mountain pass, or disrupting a waystation was a direct attack on the system's functionality. It was a way to make the empire's presence falter, to reclaim local space by severing the lines of control. Such acts were not merely vandalism, they were geopolitical statements demonstrating that the emperor's reach could be broken mile by mile. This duality reveals the central tension of imperial infrastructure. A road is a tool, and like any tool, its moral weight depends on who holds it. The same path that carries the tax collector also carries the rebel. The same bridge that reinforces imperial unity becomes a choke point for its enemies. The empire's greatest strength, its ability to compress space and time, could, in a moment of crisis, become its most critical weakness. This forces us to reconsider the very nature of the transformation we've traced. Was it ever truly complete, or was the loyalty of a province always a tense negotiation between the benefits of connection and the simmering potential for its violent rejection? Even the most ambitious imperial blueprint could be torn apart by the land itself. For all their engineering brilliance, empires repeatedly encountered frontiers where their transformative formula met its match. These were regions where geography was not a passive canvas to be redrawn, but an active, hostile force. Here, the road network, that ultimate tool of integration, faltered and frayed, proving that stone and will could not conquer every landscape or every people. The dense, rain-soaked forests of Germania beyond the Rhine presented Rome with a problem no legion could permanently solve. Roman roads required open ground, clear lines of sight, and stable foundations. The Teutoburg forest offered none of these. Its thick canopy blocked sunlight, leaving the ground beneath perpetually wet and soft. Its narrow, winding animal trails were perfect for ambush, as 3 entire legions discovered to their catastrophic end in 9 AD. Building a durable, straight Roman highway through such terrain was a logistical nightmare. The forest would simply reclaim the clearing, its roots buckling stone, its constant dampness rotting wooden bridges. More importantly, the social and economic logic of the road failed to take root. The Germanic tribes were semi-nomadic, their wealth in herds, not fixed farms. They had no centralized towns for Roman roads to connect, no settled elite easily co-opted by trade goods. The Roman model relied on creating nodes of controlled towns, markets, villas, but in Germania, the nodes themselves were mobile and dispersed. The empire could win battles, but it could not build the stable, taxable landscape its system required to function. The cost of maintaining a military presence in such an environment, with supply lines stretching back across the Rhine, eventually outweighed any perceived benefit. Germania remained a military zone, a bloody sink for resources, never transforming into a peaceful, integrated province. The road stopped at the river, and with it stopped Rome's dream of total transformation. A similar, even more dramatic struggle played out along the soaring roof of the world. The Tibetan Plateau, with its thin air, brutal winters, and vast distances, defied the administrative reach of even the powerful Tang dynasty. The Tang built roads and forged alliances, but their control was always seasonal and precarious. A Tang army could march into the plateau during the short summer, but supplying it through the long, frozen winter was nearly impossible. The logistical strain was immense. Nomadic Tibetan cavalry, supremely adapted to the environment, could move with a freedom that Tang infantry and supply trains could not match. They were not defending cities an empire could besiege. They were defending a way of life intrinsically tied to a harsh geography. The Tang could build a fortress, but the Tibetan nomads could simply flow around it, severing its supply lines along those vulnerable mountain roads. Control would seesaw for centuries, a testament to the plateau's power to resist permanent integration. It absorbed cultural influences from China, but it never became a Sinicized heartland. Its political center of gravity remained stubbornly independent, anchored to its own high-altitude reality. These examples reveal a critical limit to the Imperial road strategy. For the model to work, the land had to be capable of being remade in the empire's image. It required a geography that could support fixed agriculture, dense settlement, and the heavy, constant traffic of carts and columns. When faced with vast deserts, trackless forests, or towering, arid plateaus, the economic calculus of empire broke down. The cost of building and holding the infrastructure exceeded the wealth that could be extracted from the land. Furthermore, the strategy required a local society that could be seduced or coerced into the imperial system. Cultures built around mobility, like the Germanic tribes or the Tibetan nomads, presented a moving target. You could not tax what you could not census, and you could not assimilate people who vanished into the landscape with their homes on their backs. In these places, the road was not a lifeline of integration. It was a fragile tentacle, easily severed. The empire's reach had finally met a force greater than its engineering, a truth written not in stone, but in the enduring resilience of certain lands and the people who knew how to live within them. A finished road was only the beginning of its story. The true test of an empire's resolve was not in the triumphant laying of the first stone, but in the silent, grinding labor of the thousandth repair. A road's power to transform was not a permanent state. It was a condition that required relentless renewal. Sun-baked paving stones cracked under cartwheels. Winter frosts heaved foundations, mountain passes washed away in spring floods, and the insistent roots of weeds could, over years, pry apart the tightest joints. Without constant care, the majestic highway would dissolve back into the landscape, its straight lines blurring, its bridges collapsing, its message of permanence turning to dust. The empire's claim on a province was only as solid as the road that connected it, and that solidity had a staggering, ongoing price. The financial machinery required for upkeep was immense. Consider the payroll alone. Specialized crews of pavimentaria in Rome, or their equivalents in other empires, were a permanent fixture along major routes. These were not slaves with shovels, but skilled engineers and stonemasons who understood drainage, foundation layers, and the geometry of a lasting surface. Their wages, along with those of the soldiers garrisoned at waystations to protect them, formed a continuous drain on the provincial treasury. Then came the material cost. High-quality gravel, quarried stone, timber for bridges, and lime for mortar had to be sourced, transported, often along the very road being repaired, and stockpiled. The logistical chain for maintenance was a mirror image of the chain that built the road in the first place, but it never ended. The network of waystations and forts, those vital nodes of control, were voracious in their own demands. A remote garrison on the Han frontier or a Roman fort along the Danube could not sustain itself. It required regular shipments of grain, salted meat, weapons, leather, and clothing. The famous cursus publicus, the Roman postal service, needed fresh horses, fodder, and stable hands at every stop. Each relay station was a tiny, hungry mouth that the empire had to feed, year after year, through good harvests and bad, through peace and through unrest. This was the hidden economy of control, a river of silver and supplies that had to flow perpetually from the heartland to the farthest edges, just to keep the system from crumbling. An empire's willingness to pay this cost was the ultimate measure of its commitment. When funds were plentiful and political will was strong, the roads shone. Milestones were replaced, ruts were planed smooth, and garrisons were fully supplied. This visible care sent a powerful signal of stability and enduring strength to the local population. But in times of crisis, a costly war elsewhere, a poor tax yield, or a weak emperor maintenance was often the first budget line to be cut. A road left to decay was a stark public confession of imperial retreat. Weeds growing between the stones, a collapsed bridge left unrepaired, a deserted waystation. These were not just inconveniences, they were symbols. They told local elites that the empire's grasp was slipping, that its promises of security and order were hollow. The slow decay of infrastructure could invite banditry, encourage local warlords to fill the power vacuum, and rekindle the very separatist sentiments the road was built to suppress. Thus, the transformation of a remote province into a loyal heartland was not a one-time event secured by conquest. It was a dynamic state, a balance maintained by the constant, costly flow of energy and resources along those stone channels. The road was both the instrument of integration and the gauge that measured its depth. Its smooth, well-maintained surface was the physical proof of an empire's confidence and capability. But its potholes and broken bridges were the first cracks in imperial authority, a silent warning that the grand design of connection was beginning to unravel from within. This relentless need for upkeep forces a final, sobering reflection on the nature of these vast networks. If their power was so fragile, so dependent on unending effort, what became of them when the empire itself could no longer bear the cost? What legacy did these ambitious lines of stone leave behind when the last imperial engineer finally turned for home? A road junction is a place of decision where one imperial channel meets another. These crossroads, along with strategic river fords and the fortified waystations spaced a day's march apart, did not remain lonely outposts for long. They became the seeds of an entirely new urban geography, one that grew not from local tradition but from imperial logic. Where the empire's roads intersected, the empire's world was born anew. The relentless flow of soldiers, officials, and merchants demanded places to rest, trade, and administer. A simple garrison fort guarding a bridge needed blacksmiths, bakers, and brewers to service it. Traders, spotting a guaranteed market of soldiers with pay, set up stalls outside the gates. Farmers from the surrounding countryside brought their surplus to this new, secure hub. Almost imperceptibly, the military camp or waystation blossomed into a market town, its layout and purpose forever shaped by the road that created it. This was the network effect in stone and society. The road network determined value. A settlement located at a key node in this system, where a north-south highway met an east-west route, or where a road funneled traffic across the only reliable river crossing for miles, found itself blessed with economic life. It became a compulsory stop, a place where goods changed hands, information was exchanged, and imperial taxes were collected. These nodes naturally evolved into administrative centers. It was logical for a regional governor to base himself where communication lines converged, where he could most easily dispatch orders and receive reports. A town hall or basilica would rise alongside the marketplace. Temples to imperial gods followed, then public baths and theaters, the full package of urban life, but delivered according to a standard imperial blueprint. The classic example is the city of Londinium in Roman Britain. Before the conquest, the Thames was likely crossed at various points by local tribes. The Romans identified the lowest dependable bridging point. They built their bridge and the road leading to it, Wattling Street. The settlement that grew at this engineered node had no prior Celtic significance. It existed because the Roman road system required it. Its street grid aligned with the roads, its port handled goods flowing in from the continent, and its administrative importance grew until it eclipsed older tribal centers. Londinium was a city conceived by logistics, a child of the network. This process systematically reshuffled the human landscape. Older indigenous population centers, often located on defensible hilltops or near ancient sacred sites, found themselves sidelined. Their value was based on a different, older geography, one of local defense and spiritual meaning. The new imperial geography valued accessibility, flow, and control. A town on a high hill might be defensible, but it was difficult for large supply carts to reach. A settlement by a shallow, meandering river ford was less useful than one at the engineered bridge site on a major highway. Slowly, economic activity, political power, and social prestige migrated to these new nodes. The old centers might persist as villages or religious sites, but the pulse of the province now beat strongest where the imperial roads met. This created a profound and lasting reorientation. A person's sense of place was rewritten. The central town in their mental map was no longer the ancestral hill fort of their grandparents, but the bustling, paved municipium down on the plain, with its imported goods, its multi-ethnic crowds, and its imposing statue of the emperor. Their world was now defined by imperial connectivity. This new urban fabric, stitched together by roads, became the ultimate physical manifestation of imperial integration. The province was no longer a collection of ancient, inward-looking communities. It was now an interconnected web of functionally similar towns, all speaking the administrative language, all following the same urban plan, all ultimately facing back toward the distant capital. The roads had not just moved people and goods, they had redrawn the map of civilization itself, planting loyal new hearts in the conquered body of the land. But this raises a curious question about the nature of this new urban life. If these towns were born from imperial design, what kind of society grew within their walls? And whose faces would you see in their forums? The straight line of a Roman road is a story waiting to be read, but its full narrative is not written on the surface. To understand the true depth of a province's transformation, we must look to the ground beneath the stones. Archaeology provides the physical evidence, the scattered clues that verify the grand historical blueprint. It reveals the quiet, everyday moments where imperial ambition became local reality. Along these engineered highways, the artifacts tell a consistent tale of integration, one measured not in miles, but in the gradual standardization of life itself. The first and most obvious markers are the milestones. These were not simple distance posts. They were imperial monuments in miniature, inscribed with the emperor's name, his titles, and the distance to the nearest major town. They were a constant, repetitive lesson in imperial geography. Finding a line of these standardized markers along a road in Britain or North Africa is archaeological proof that the land was being measured and claimed by a central authority. The very act of counting distance from a Roman town rather than from a local landmark reoriented the mental map of every traveler. But the more subtle and perhaps more telling evidence comes from the roadside settlements themselves. Excavations at these sites reveal a quiet revolution in domestic life. The coarse, handmade pottery of pre-Roman tribes gradually disappears from the archaeological layers. In its place, we find shards of mass-produced, wheel-thrown Roman-style pottery, fine red Samian ware from Gaul, or sturdy amphorae that once held Spanish olive oil or Italian wine. These are not luxury items for a tiny elite. They are the tableware of ordinary people. Their presence signifies that local tastes had changed, that provincial households were now connected to a vast, empire-wide trade network that flowed along those very roads. The goods they consumed and the trash they left behind bore the stamp of Rome. Changes in how people honored their loved ones offer some of the most profound evidence of shifting identity. In many provinces, ancient burial practices involving large communal tombs or elaborate rites gave way to more standardized Roman customs. Individual inhumation burials, often aligned in neat rows outside settlement walls, became common. Grave goods might include simple items like coins for Charon, the ferryman of the underworld, or small pots for offerings, concepts imported with Roman religion. This shift in final resting places speaks to a deeper cultural absorption. The way a society cares for its departed reflects its core beliefs about community, the afterlife, and the individual. The adoption of new practices suggests those beliefs were being reshaped by the constant cultural traffic on the imperial highway. Finally, the architectural footprint of the state leaves an unmistakable imprint. The ruins of a Roman fort are clear, but the buildings of civil administration are just as revealing. Archaeologists identify the foundations of large, standardized granaries near road junctions. These were not barns for local surplus. They were state-controlled storage depots for the annona, the grain tax, designed with raised floors for ventilation to preserve the harvest. The discovery of a bathhouse complex in a remote provincial town is not merely a sign of luxury. It is evidence of a Roman lifestyle, a social ritual of hygiene, leisure, and community that required sophisticated engineering for heated rooms and water supply. The presence of a forum, a basilica for law, and temples to the imperial cult complete the picture. Together, these structures formed a civic package, a kit of parts that the empire installed to create a functional, recognizable Roman town anywhere from the deserts of Syria to the mists of Britain. This archaeological record is our primary tool for verifying the narrative. History books can tell us an empire built roads to control a province, but only the layered soil can show us how that control seeped into the homes, the meals, and the very rituals of the people who lived there. The stones of the road built the channel, but the broken pottery, the altered burial grounds, and the foundations of state granaries are the sediments that settled within it, proving the current of transformation was real. Yet, if archaeology shows us the success of this imperial formula, it also reveals its most haunting and paradoxical legacy. What happens when the empire falls and the engineers, the soldiers, and the tax collectors vanish? Does the transformation they wrought simply vanish with them, or does it leave a ghost in the landscape, a set of tracks leading nowhere? The silent transformation of a landscape is not just written in stone and pottery, it is etched into the very earth. Beyond the ruins of walls and the scatter of artifacts, a quieter, more profound record exists, waiting in the soil itself. To read this record, we turn to the tools of modern science, to fields like palynology and archaeobotany. These disciplines allow us to reconstruct ancient environments by analyzing microscopic pollen grains and preserved plant remains. What they reveal along the corridors of imperial roads is a story of deliberate ecological engineering, a physical reshaping of the land to fit an imperial vision. As settlers traveled those roads, they did not come empty-handed. They brought their familiar crops in sacks and their agricultural practices in their minds. The pollen record tells this tale clearly. In soil cores taken near Roman road settlements in places like Britain or North Africa, scientists observe a dramatic shift. The native pollen from local forests and wild grasses diminishes over time. In its place, a new signature appears, the distinctive pollen of imported cereals like wheat and barley, and of orchard crops like the olive and the grapevine. This is not a subtle change. It is a biological revolution captured in layers of mud, proving that the diet, and therefore the very economy of the province, was being systematically redirected. The land itself was being reprogrammed to produce what the empire demanded. This agricultural colonization required space, and that demand left another clear mark in the soil: deforestation. To create the vast, open fields needed for grain cultivation or for grazing imperial livestock, forests were cleared. The pollen record shows a steep decline in tree pollen like oak and elm, corresponding with the period of intense road building and settlement. Charcoal fragments in the soil layers often confirm that fire was a tool of this transformation. The straight Roman road, once lined by ancient woodland, soon ran through a managed, open landscape of farms and pastures. This was not an accidental environmental change. It was policy made visible in the ecology. The empire needed a predictable, taxable surplus, and that required turning diverse, self-sufficient ecosystems into monocultural engines of production. The road provided the access, the settlers provided the labor, and the soil absorbed the lasting evidence of their work. This scientific evidence closes a crucial loop in our understanding. It moves the narrative from the grand strategy of emperors and engineers down to the intimate level of a single plowed field. We can now see the imperial blueprint not only in a city's grid or a bridge's arch, but in the very pollen of a foreign wheat plant taking root in a conquered valley. The empire's reach extended beyond laws and languages. It reshaped the air, the seeds, and the seasons. Remove the imperial road from this story, and the entire narrative unravels. Let us conduct a brief, sobering thought experiment. What becomes of a province like Roman Britain or the Han Dynasty's Hexi Corridor if the engineers never arrive, if the straight, durable highways are never stamped across the landscape? The likely answer is not a simple pause in progress, but an entirely different historical trajectory, one defined by persistent fragmentation and isolation. Without that engineered spine, the legions remain slow, reactive forces. A rebellion like Boudicca's might have succeeded, fracturing the island back into competing tribal kingdoms, each turning inward. The economic rewiring never happens. British tin and grain stay local, never fueling the imperial machine or attracting Mediterranean merchants in return. Londinium remains a minor settlement at a river crossing, not a global hub. Culturally, Latin remains a foreign tongue of occasional traders and rare diplomats, never the language of law and daily commerce. Britain likely remains a mosaic of Celtic societies, perhaps influenced by continental contacts, but never integrated into the political and economic superstructure that shaped Western Europe for centuries. It would have been a land apart, its development delayed and its destiny shaped by a slower, more localized rhythm. The Hexi Corridor presents an even starker counterfactual. Without the Han walls, roads, and agricultural colonies, that arid strip remains a true no-man's land, dominated by nomadic confederations. The Silk Road, as a secure, state-maintained highway, simply does not form. Trade might occur in fits and starts, a dangerous trickle of daring caravans, not the transformative flood of goods and ideas that linked China to Rome. The corridor never becomes a Sinicized province. The cities of Dunhuang and Jiuquan never rise as multicultural oases. China itself turns more inward, its western frontier a permanent, threatening barrier rather than a gateway. The profound cultural exchanges that defined the Tang dynasty, the Buddhism, the art, the technologies that flowed east and west are drastically diminished. The corridor and much of Central Asia might have remained a politically fractured, economically peripheral zone for centuries longer, a blank space on the map between empires rather than the thread that stitched them together. This exercise reveals the road not as a passive backdrop, but as the active causal agent. It was the necessary condition that made all other imperial transformations possible. The roads compressed space, which accelerated time, which reshaped economies, which reformed identities. Without them, the empire's power remained theoretical, a distant rumor. The provinces would have been connected to the imperial heart by little more than a shaky line on a map, easily severed. The road made the connection physical, undeniable, and permanent. It turned imperial ambition into provincial reality. So we are left with a final, lingering question about the nature of this legacy. if these roads were so powerful, so foundational to the world we inherited, where do we see their ghost today? Can we still trace the lines of ancient power in the modern landscape around us? The stone itself held no preference for how it was used. Across continents and centuries, the same fundamental tool, the engineered road, was wielded by empires with distinct ambitions, resulting in different blueprints for transformation. By placing these models side by side, we can see how imperial philosophy directly shaped the design of the network and the very nature of the heartland it aimed to create. The Roman model was one of territorial absorption and deep cultural assimilation. Their roads were built as permanent, invasive grafts into the landscape, designed to make the foreign familiar. The goal was not merely to control a province but to remake it in Rome's image. Their network was dense, public, and open, facilitating the constant flow of settlers, Latin, law, and Roman guards. The road led to the colony replicated Roman urban life, and within generations the province's identity was irrevocably blended. A successful Roman road meant that a person in Britannia or Gaul could think of themselves as Roman. The transformation was cultural and psychological, aiming to erase the line between conqueror and conquered by making the province a copy of the core. In stark contrast, the Persian and Inca models prioritized administrative control and resource extraction over cultural conversion. The Persian Royal Road was a closed, state-operated system for information and authority, not for mass migration. Its purpose was to make the diverse, sprawling empire governable, not homogeneous. Loyalty was ensured through the sheer speed of royal command and the threat of swift retribution, not through imposing a Persian language or lifestyle on Egyptians or Babylonians. Similarly, the Inca Qhapaq Ñan was a sacred and logistical circuit for mobilizing labor and redistributing goods under the watchful eye of the state. It integrated people through shared service and economic dependency, weaving them into the imperial fabric while often leaving local languages and customs intact. For these empires, the road was a tool for managing diversity, not eliminating it. The heartland they created was an efficiently administered, loyal economic zone, not a cultural clone. The Chinese model, particularly under the Qin and Han, pursued a third path, bureaucratic standardization as the engine of unity. Their straight roads and standardized axle widths were physical expressions of a drive for uniformity. The goal was to create a seamless administrative machine where every part functioned identically. The network enabled a centralized bureaucracy to operate across vast distances, circulating officials, standardized script, and Confucian ideology. It sought to unify behavior and thought at the level of state function, creating a common framework for governance that could encompass many local cultures. The transformation here was systemic, creating a realm where any educated individual, regardless of birthplace, could operate within a single, predictable imperial system. The heartland was defined not by shared ethnic culture, as in Rome, but by shared administrative and philosophical language. These comparative frameworks reveal a crucial insight. An empire's roads were a mirror of its soul. Rome's dense, colonizing network reflected its belief in a universal civilization. Persia's swift courier routes mirrored its genius for managing a patchwork realm. China's standardized highways embodied its quest for perfect bureaucratic order. Each design achieved a form of integration, but the resulting heartland bore a different imprint: cultural, economic, or administrative. This raises a final, unifying question that transcends all their differences. When the empires that built them are gone, what remains of these colossal efforts in the world we walk through today? The ghost of an imperial road never truly vanishes. Its logic is too sound, its path too efficient to be erased by mere centuries. Look at a map of modern Europe, and you will see the past written in asphalt. The route of Italy's Autostrada del Sole, racing south from Milan to Naples, shadows the ancient Via Appia with an eerie precision. In Britain, the A2 road from London to Dover follows the line of Watling Street, the Roman military highway that once connected the capital to the continent. This is not a coincidence of convenience. It is a testament to the enduring geographical intelligence of empire. Those Roman engineers were not just building roads, they were solving the fundamental puzzle of how to move across a landscape with maximum efficiency. They identified the easiest mountain passes, the most stable river crossings, the most defensible ridges. 2,000 years of technological revolution later, from horse carts to horsepower, the optimal solution for crossing that same terrain often remains unchanged. The modern highway, in its relentless straightaways and gentle curves, pays silent homage to the surveyors who first laid a ruler across the land. This persistence of path extends far beyond Rome. In Iran, sections of the modern highway between Tehran and the ancient city of Susa retrace the very foundation of the Persian Royal Road. The logic of swift, secure communication that guided the king's couriers still dictates the route for trucks and cars today. High in the Andes, the Pan-American Highway, that monumental spine of the Americas, frequently converges with the old Inca Qhapaq Ñan. Modern engineers, facing the same daunting cliffs and valleys, found that the Inca solution, a carefully graded trail along a specific contour, was still the best and sometimes the only viable route. The empire's sacred highway has become a nation's essential artery. What does this tell us? It reveals that the most profound legacy of these imperial networks is not the ruins we visit as tourists, but the invisible framework they burned into the land. The ancient transformations we've traced, the economic rewiring, the demographic shifts, the cultural blending, all depended on creating a new, permanent geography of connection. Once established, that geography became the default setting. Towns that grew at Roman road junctions became medieval market towns, then industrial cities, then modern metropolitan centers. Their success was locked in by their original, imperial positioning. To abandon the ancient road would mean abandoning centuries of accumulated human settlement and economic investment that grew around it. The road created a corridor of destiny, and we are still living within its lines. This enduring footprint forces a humbling realization. The empires themselves have crumbled into history, their languages faded, their gods forgotten. But their most pragmatic tool, the engineered road, achieved a kind of immortality. It outlasted the emperors who commissioned it and the legions who marched on it because it answered a question more fundamental than loyalty or tribute. How do we move through this world together? In following their stone tracks with our paved ones, we are not just saving on surveying costs. We are acknowledging that the ancient blueprint for integration was so geographically perfect, so logically sound, that it continues to shape the pulse of nations and the flow of continents. The empire's dream of a connected world did not die with its last administrator. It merely lay dormant in the landscape, waiting for a new civilization to rediscover the path. The straight line of a Roman road and the silent pulse of a fiber optic cable are governed by the same fundamental law. The ancient imperial blueprint for integration was not a relic of its time. It was the discovery of a first principle, a rule of power and connection that transcends technology. Today, we see this principle reassert itself not with stone and legion, but with silicon and satellite signals. The modern world is engaged in its own great project of geopolitical integration, and its tools are digital highways. Consider a remote valley, perhaps in the mountains of a developing nation. For generations, its economy and culture were defined by isolation, by the slow, difficult paths in and out. Then a new kind of road arrives, not of gravel but of glass. A fiber optic cable is laid, or a satellite internet terminal is installed in the village square. This connection is the modern equivalent of the imperial road's first, durable foundation. It creates a channel of standardized access, compressing time and distance with a speed that would stun a Roman engineer. Just as the Appian Way made the hills of Samnium accessible to Rome, this digital link makes the global marketplace accessible to the valley. Suddenly, an artisan can sell crafts directly to international buyers. A farmer can check commodity prices in real time, no longer dependent on a middleman's word. A student can access the same educational resources as someone in a capital city. This is economic re-engineering in its contemporary form. The local, subsistence-based economy is rewired, drawn into the circulatory system of the global digital economy. The valley begins to produce not just for itself, but for a network, its value now measured in bandwidth and digital reach rather than just in bushels of grain. Political and cultural integration follow this digital pathway with familiar inevitability. The Internet becomes the conduit for a new administrative language, not of Latin decrees, but of standardized software, global financial protocols, and the pervasive influence of major cultural exporters. National governments can deliver services, disseminate information, and even conduct digital censuses with unprecedented efficiency, extending the soft power of the state directly into homes that were once beyond easy reach. Local identities are not erased, but they are inevitably layered with new, globally informed perspectives, creating a modern form of blended citizenship. The digital highway, like the stone one, carries both opportunity and a subtle form of dependency. The valley's newfound prosperity hinges on the stability of its connection and its place within the larger digital ecosystem. This framing reveals the ancient process not as a curious artifact, but as a recurring pattern in human organization. Whether the medium is cobblestone or cable, the imperative remains: to integrate is to build channels of control and exchange. The empire sought to turn a province into a heartland. Today, nations and corporations seek to integrate remote regions into global supply chains, financial networks, and spheres of cultural influence. The goal is the same: to transform isolation into interdependence, and in doing so, to rewrite the map of power and belonging. This digital analogy forces us to look back at those ancient roads with new respect. They were not merely feats of engineering, but the physical manifestation of a timeless geopolitical logic. The emperors and engineers of old were grappling with the same core challenge we face today: how to bind a vast, diverse world into a coherent, manageable whole. Their solution, etched in stone across continents, whispers an enduring truth about the nature of integration itself. It is always, at its heart, a project of connection, and every connection inevitably transforms both the place it reaches and the power that sends it. Even the most meticulously mapped imperial network holds shadows. For all we understand about these grand systems, certain stretches of stone and earth remain stubbornly enigmatic, their original purpose or full reach lost to time, leaving modern historians and archaeologists with tantalizing puzzles. These unresolved mysteries remind us that our blueprint, while detailed, is still incomplete. Take, for instance, the precise alignments of some Roman roads in the most rugged, mountainous regions of the empire. While the Roman passion for straight lines is legendary, in places like the Alps or the Apennines, surveyors sometimes chose routes that seemed to defy their own logic. A road might swerve dramatically to pass a lone, nondescript rock outcrop, or take a perplexingly steep grade when a gentler slope was available nearby. One leading theory suggests these were not engineering errors, but deliberate choices tied to a sacred geography we no longer perceive. That outcrop might have been a local spirit stone, a place of such deep cultural significance to the indigenous people that the Roman road builders, in a pragmatic act of spiritual diplomacy, incorporated it into their path to ease acceptance of their new order. The road thus becomes a hybrid, a line of imperial power bending just slightly to the older magic of the land it sought to conquer. The scale of the Inca Qhapaq Ñan is awe-inspiring, but its true edges are blurred. While the highland network is famously well preserved, its tendrils into the dense Amazonian cloud forest present a frontier of active discovery. Archaeologists using advanced LIDAR technology, which can digitally strip away the forest canopy, are only beginning to trace the ghostly outlines of roads, platforms, and settlements swallowed by the jungle. These routes challenge our understanding of the empire's ambitions. Were they built for military expeditions into the lowlands, for accessing rare medicinal plants or exotic feathers, or were they pilgrimage paths to sacred sites deep in what the Inca considered a powerful spiritual wilderness? Each newly discovered trail segment forces a reconsideration of the empire's relationship with this ecologically hostile yet resource-rich zone, suggesting a reach and a purpose even more complex than we imagined. Perhaps the most fundamental debates swirl not around where a road went, but why it was built in the first place. A single highway can bear many kinds of traffic. Scholars examining the same paved route might see conflicting primary functions. One argues convincingly from the width of the roadbed and the spacing of fortifications that it was clearly a military supply line built for the rapid movement of troops. Another points to the luxurious villas and elaborate market complexes that sprang up along its length, arguing it was conceived from the start as an economic artery to develop a new province. A third, noting its alignment with celestial events and its terminus at a major temple complex, posits a primary ritual purpose, with trade and security as fortunate byproducts. The truth, as is often the case, likely resides in a layered intent. The empire's genius was in building infrastructures so robust that they could serve all these purposes simultaneously, their functions shifting with the needs of the era. The road was a multi-layered tool, and trying to isolate a single, true purpose may be to misunderstand the holistic, strategic mind of the imperial planner. These lingering questions are not failures of history, but invitations. They are the places where the map ends and the real exploration continues, reminding us that every answered question about these ancient networks reveals new mysteries waiting just around the next bend in the path. A stone road is more than a path, it is a pulse. Across every empire we have traced, from Rome's legions to the Inca's runners, the network functioned with a singular biological logic. It was the empire's circulatory system. The heart of this vast body beat in the capital, in Rome, in Cusco, in Chang'an. From that central pump, the great roads branched out like arteries, carrying the essential lifeblood of imperial power to every extremity. And what was this lifeblood? It was the soldiers who were the defensive white blood cells, rushing to sites of infection or rebellion. It was the grain, silver, and textiles that were the nourishing plasma, sustaining the core's massive energy needs. It was the laws, language, and decrees that acted as hormonal signals, regulating the behavior of distant cells, and it was the officials, inspectors, and settlers who served as the oxygen-carrying red blood cells, delivering the vital breath of administrative authority to the farthest tissues of the realm. This was not a passive network of trade routes. It was a dynamic, pressurized system designed for one overarching purpose: metabolic transformation. A remote province was not merely a conquered territory, an external limb held by force. Through the relentless, rhythmic pumping of this imperial lifeblood along its hardened channels, that province underwent a fundamental change. It was integrated into the body's own metabolic processes. Its resources were digested and sent to feed the heart. Its people were incorporated into the body's labor and defense. Its local identity was gradually broken down and reassembled with imperial materials, becoming compatible with the whole. In this way, the foreign limb was metabolically transformed into a vital organ. Egypt became the empire's stomach, processing grain. the Hexi Corridor became a lung, exchanging the breath of commerce with the outside world. Britannia became a strong arm, producing soldiers and metals. Each once distant land began to function for the survival and growth of the imperial organism, its own health now inseparable from the health of the whole. The road network made this symbiosis possible. Without these channels, the lifeblood would pool at the core, and the extremities would wither and die, or worse, become hostile organisms fighting for their own survival. The roads created the constant, reciprocal flow that defined a single, living entity. This circulatory metaphor explains the ultimate success and the profound fragility of these empires. So long as the heart remained strong and the arteries remained clear, the body thrived, growing more complex and interconnected with each beat. But if the heart weakened or if a blockage formed, a collapsed bridge, a rebel-held pass, a bankrupt treasury, the flow would falter. The distant organs, once so vital, would be the first to suffer, their connection to the sustaining center cut. They might atrophy, or they might learn to pump on their own, becoming independent bodies once more. The grand transformation was not a permanent state, but a dynamic equilibrium maintained by the unending rhythm of traffic on a stone road. The straight lines on our maps are rarely just geography, they are frozen decisions. For millennia, empires understood a fundamental truth that to control a land, you must first redefine how one moves through it. The road network was their chosen instrument of geopolitical alchemy, a deliberate technology for transmuting distance into proximity, foreignness into familiarity, and conquered territory into loyal heartland. It was never an afterthought, it was the opening move in a long game of absorption. From the stone arteries of Rome to the mountain staircases of the Inca, the pattern repeats with a clarity that feels almost like a law of history. Infrastructure is not a consequence of power, it is the primary shaper of human political geography. It builds the channels through which all other forces, economic, cultural, military, must flow, thereby determining the very shape of the world that emerges. We see this ancient blueprint not as a relic but as a recurring principle. Today, the channels are fiber optic cables, satellite constellations, and global shipping lanes, yet the imperative remains the same. To connect is to transform, to integrate is to control. The ghosts of those ancient roads are still with us. They whisper in the path of a modern highway that follows a 2,000-year-old surveyor's line. They echo in the way a remote village, once linked by a new road or a cell tower, finds its destiny suddenly and irrevocably rewired to a distant center of power. The flow of people, ideas, and capital still follows the deepest grooves worn into the landscape by imperial ambition. If this journey through the alchemy of ancient roads has reshaped how you see the world beneath your feet, consider this an invitation to look closer. What lines of connection, old or new, are shaping the map of your own world? Your curiosity is the best tool for discovery. If you want to keep unraveling history's deepest patterns with us, subscribing is the simplest way to ensure you never miss the next exploration. Thank you for watching.